Okay, so I was reviewing the configure team meeting notes async, and just wanted to um, sync up with everybody because I didn't feel like um, the arguments that I had been making in my own proposal were like shining through in the latest discussion I'd seen in those docs. But even on the other proposals, I felt like things weren't really like squared up, and we weren't really talking about the same things in each of the proposals. Like for example, the one that I assume Mikhail had authored. Um, it seemed like we were basically asking him to implement Flux point by point, and sort of grilling him on how we might do that, right? And I don't think that that's really like the conversation that we should be having, and it's not the conversation that I intended to initiate with the Flux proposal. Um, does that make sense? I just want to touch base with everybody before I get too in the weeds.
Yeah, so what you've seen is the estimation docs, I guess. We have I think four of them total. Two of them are estimating complexities of implementing these features with the agent, so without Flux.
Mm-hmm.
And one of them is and then those are split between Go and Rails. And then one of them is uh complexities of implementing these features as this, like, these are all just one-line descriptions, so it's kind of open-ended what that means, but they are so that one is for Flux. So for example, like with like GitLab integration, like with, because some of these are not just Flux features, but features that we want for GitOps going forward.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last one is front end. So that's the fourth one. And so the idea was to compare, like, say we built out, like, went with Flux integration, like have a rough idea of the cost of doing things that way versus trying to achieve those like similar features moving forward with the agent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that'll make sense. So I guess like the other reason that I wanted to sync up with everybody was like obviously the conversation is very oriented around GitOps, which makes sense because that's the feature that we're talking about, right? Um, but at the same time, like while we're having that conversation, I think it's important to talk about what the experience looks like for folks that aren't using GitOps at all, right? And I think if we focus too much on what GitOps looks like, we risk like losing perspective on the overall like Kubernetes management picture, right? And I think like that's really the risk that I want to try to mitigate in this call. Um, because I think that we should neither be looking to like double down on Flux, nor should we be looking to double down on our own GitOps solution in terms of like the enablement of the broader category, right? Like I think everything under Kubernetes management is going to become a lot more compelling. Like if it doesn't necessitate a conversation around GitOps, right? Like in particular, like today, it's impossible to use the Kubernetes agent without sort of using like our GitOps stuff as well, right? Um, which I guess could be fine, but I think currently is like limiting the flexibility of the solution, which is really what I was like originally trying to lay out in the Flux proposal. Like I kind of wish that I hadn't even presented it in the context of Flux initially, but like I I think that what we should be aiming for is letting people use whatever stuff they want to, and us being able to present that meaningfully in the UI, no matter what it is, right? So like, whether somebody wants to use Flux or they want to use Argo or they want to use our own GitOps solution, we should be able to accommodate all of those use cases. Let me just stop right there. Does everybody agree with that statement?
Yeah, so you're saying, so you want composability and that you want us to be tool agnostic on the GitOps side.
Not like specifically on the GitOps side, just in the entire like category, right?
So, instead of excluding the GitOps, can we focus on like what will be there? So what you're saying is that a piece is like the features that should be there is connectivity to the cluster from GitLab, associated to maybe projects or groups or whatever, and then having a UI on top of that, which presents you arbitrary objects from the cluster, which you have access to, or you can discover them. I don't know, like Lens or Rancher or all these kind of tools have, like this kind of thing. And then we have like distinct features which operate on the cluster, like GitOps or CI access, right?
Yeah, I think that's a great way to frame it.
Did I capture your intent in my summary there?
Yeah, I think so. Let's take some notes on what was just said. So like, we want to focus on cluster connectivity and providing a UI that can present arbitrary resources in the cluster. I think that to me, that is a good summary of the core of what Kubernetes management should be. And when I think about like where we're at today, first of all, we don't have the UI, but that's planned, right? But in thinking about like how do we even enable the UI in the first place, I think it's difficult to do today. And I think the way the runner works now is a good analogy of how I think things ought to work, right? So like with the runner, you can associate it at the group or project level, and you basically just get access to this compute environment, right? But you can associate a runner with one or more projects, and it's not exactly how things would need to work with the agent, but it's pretty close, right? Like the way things work today, you have an agent config project, and that's sort of like the centralized hub for how you manage everything in the cluster, right? What this prevents me from doing is like, as an operator of this cluster like agent configuration project, I have no way to like provide other teams with scoped access to the cluster, really, right? I think the closest thing we have is like sort of like the CI tunnel, but again, that's configured through the agent config project. And so like what would make a bit more sense to me is if like we at least had the option of having all this stuff like decoupled from GitOps, right? Like decoupled from the agent config project. So it would be cool if like I could deploy an agent and that agent is just providing like read-only access to the cluster for this project, right? As an example. That way, like as a platform admin who owns the cluster, I can provide other teams with varying levels of access to the cluster without being opinionated about whether they're going to use GitOps or CI or bootstrap the cluster manually with Flux or whatever they want to do, right? So like in terms of like thinking about how would we enable the front end to build a UI with our current solution, I think that's really hard right now because there's no way for me to just like map agents to projects, right? It's like there's no way to like jailbreak out of this like agent config and manifest project structure that we're
But there
enforcing.
is, that's how the CI tunnel works, and we have a proposal, like we're implementing that right now. It's you like, so the agent configuration project and the configuration file, this is just like, this is a file that in fact could as well be a database like configuration with a UI on top. And so that configuration file, like from that file, you can share um with other projects, just like so with a CI tunnel, you say these projects gain access to my agent. For front end access, we're going to have the users of these projects can have access to my agent, and in exactly the same way as the CI tunnel.
Yeah, and I think that's close to what we need, but like I get confused there because it's like we call that CI tunnel, right? But why is it associated with that particular feature, right? Why am I not just like broadly providing Kubernetes management to this other project, right? Once we have the UI, right? Imagine that like a separate developer team wants to use some combination of CI and GitOps, and also wants to be able to view their resources in the cluster in their project, right? Like I get what you're saying, that you can, like, as a platform team, I can provide this other project CI tunnel access, right? But is that the same as providing them like a view of what they've deployed through CI?
No, those are mutually exclusive. You can provide one or the other, so they're independent, but they work using the same backend technology. It's just the same proxy with different credentials.
Okay, yeah, but why do we call those different features? Like as a platform operator, why can I not just grant this project access to the cluster in a way that allows them to do whatever they want to do in a feature independent way? Does my question make sense? Like, it's like what I really want to
Yeah.
do is just provide access to the cluster and not care about like what features they're using via that access.
The some of it's just because we built the CI tunnel first. We hadn't thought about front end access, so that's why it is limited to CI access. And then, so that's why we would have to introduce a new top level option either way. And then the rest of it is just the that the UI grants a lot riskier access because it's from your browser, and you would want to be much more careful with who gets API access to your Kubernetes cluster from your browser.
Yep.
But we do intend for folks to be able to perform both read and write operations through the UI, right?
Oh yeah, it will be a full API, full Kubernetes API, the same API as is exposed to the CI tunnel.
Okay.
Just using different credentials. It will be cookie, and
Right.
and
Yeah.
for for authorization, it's RBAC. By on core, it's just the same as a CI tunnel. You just get the service account of the agent. So really, single developer focused feature. But you can on premium, you can have the impersonation. So you'll get the user's identity and the groups, like all the different projects through which they were given access. All of those appear in your RBAC.
Mm-hmm.
Is the idea.
You mean across all projects? Like that's what I get in like a generated kubectl config?
So well, you'll just be in the browser and you'll be making requests to the cluster, and the cluster will see this user as, so your GitLab user, and then attached to it will be groups. And it's not just all groups that are in your GitLab thing, because that's like can be unbounded in size. It's just the groups that the operator mentioned in their config. So, and project. So I say like, I'm a member of GitLab or GitLab, and I'm a member of like GitLab org backend, well, CI templates maintainers, say. And if they shared access with those two groups, those will appear in my group list. So like you can target, like out of the groups you've listed, you can target RBAC to those.
There's a document about it.
Yeah, there's a proposal with the details.
So what I'm wondering is, why isn't it that like from an operator perspective, managing the agent configuration project, you just grant like the maximal permissions for that like project you're targeting, and this project decides if and who can use can use this config through CI, the UI, and these kind of things. Like, why does the infrastructure team decide what the project can do on like detailed level? Does it make sense?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Like, as an infrastructure operator, I wouldn't care like if they use this access I provide them using CI, using the UI, using GitOps, using whatever.
And I think on top of that, it's like if we're going to do an integration with the environments, why is it not the maintainer or owner of that project that's associating various access that they've been given to one or more clusters with those environment scopes? Isn't that a project level decision and not an infra level decision?
So just to make sure I understood the question. The question is, why does the platform operator decide who has UI access and who has CI access?
Yes, I would imagine
as
that,
opposed to the project of each.
Yes, I would imagine that the platform project or operator would provision something, maybe that's automatically done through this agent. You get, for example, a namespace in the service account, and this has, you have access to this, and this is granted to that project, and they can decide what they do with that. They use it they may even create more service accounts, one for the UI and one for CI or whatever. They're basically free to do what they want. And yeah, the environment is a good point. It's the same thing.
Yeah, likewise, you might associate, like, on a per project basis, the maintainer might decide like what level of access a developer has versus a maintainer, right? Like for some projects, it's going to be okay for a developer to have read write. For some projects, it's only acceptable for the maintainer to have write access. But to your point, I don't think I don't think the infrastructure operator knows that, aka the person who's maintaining the agent config project.
So in that case, I think the current solution actually does provide that flexibility. What you would do is you would bootstrap your RBAC by giving the maintainers of those projects, like via the user access, you would give them the like cluster admin rights or whatever, like very broad rights to administer the things that they're supposed to administer. And then they can further grant rights within their domain to their users. If we're using the user impersonation across the board, then that's like that would work. But I have to say I haven't really thought about this before. So
yeah, I mean the one area that we don't solve today is environment scoping, right? like there's no way for really like the project maintainer or the agent config project maintainer to associate the access that was provided with an environment scope in any way.
We have environment scoping just recently for CI access, actually.
Okay.
And we have solved environment tier scoping already with the CI access user impersonation. You can target an environment tier with a group. So that becomes a specific RBAC group.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to grant, like if you have a single review app namespace, then you can just put review as the group, and that would be like, and then like that way you can target the review app deployments. But yeah, a lot of this is new and not really well. We haven't documented workflows. Like we're coming up with these kind of cool features or features we think are cool, but we haven't really documented workflows or built.
Do you think for the sake of simplicity, it would be worthwhile to consider providing like projects access to the cluster broadly rather than on like a feature by feature basis? Because like I recognize that a lot of what you just said like is possible in some obscure way for platform operators to configure, but wouldn't all this be a lot easier to understand and communicate and document if as an operator I could just say these 4 projects have namespace edit on each of these namespaces respectively, and then like because otherwise like they sort of have to do that for the CI tunnel case, and then like maybe they also have to like set up manifest project access, and I'm not sure whether you can like force a given manifest project to use a given service account for impersonation during the synchronization, like that sort of stuff, right?
Yeah, we were gonna do that like this milestone, but we halted all GitOps work because of the evaluation for Flux. But yeah, that's like that was on the impersonation at the GitOps manifest, like at the synchronization level was like that's actually relatively simple to implement.
Mm-hmm.
But regarding the question of whether it makes sense to so the question is really, should we have a top level like entity, like a GitLab entity, so namespace or project, and group the features by that rather than have top level features and grouped by like and have a per project under each feature, right?
Or just grant access broadly and leave it up to the maintainer on the other side, like how they're going to leverage that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm sure that for some users, they're going to want to have that level of control on the infrastructure side, like CI access versus user access.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's both a case of wanting more fine-grained control on the operator side and a case of wanting less fine-grained control on the operator side and enabling both of those, right? Because like most operators, I think, want to be like, this is the highest level of permission I want this project to access the cluster under, right? But aside from that, I don't care how that project maintainer structures their own team and use cases and what features they use and what features they don't use, right? I just want to make sure that like that when they're browsing the UI in the context of that project, that this is the scope of what is possible to see, and this is the scope of what's possible to operate on, regardless of whether it's the UI, the CI, or GitOps that they're actually using, right? Because from my perspective as an operator, it's all the same.
Yeah, I mean, it's not. I would be curious what feature it would be if the operator would want to control that, because it's not a safety or security feature, right? Because they can still, if they grant access via CI but not UI, I mean, they can still break stuff. I mean, it's not giving you any more control.
Yeah. And it's like leaky because I have to make sure that the CI tunnel feature is configured the same as the gitops feature and the same as like how the UI is configured, right? But like what I want to make sure is absolutely true is that the project has this scope, right? Across all features. Like I feel like it's difficult to properly, like, assuming that we even had all these features implemented in the first place, it would then be difficult to properly ensure that a given project is scoped to a given service account across all functionality at present, which is the most important thing, I think, for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, the user and job impersonation takes care of that somewhat by default, but then it's up to you to provision all that RBAC to make it work
Across each
And-
feature, yeah.
Yeah.
But also then, even if you do, like in today's world, even if I do set all that up properly as a platform admin, I've now sort of constrained what is possible to do within the project, because like maintainers, like they control what their own environments and how their own environments are named and tagged and whatnot. And so like there's no way for them to like break out of the conventions that the infrastructure team has enforced, even though they're like arbitrary and don't necessarily map to how that project is actually maintained.
But isn't that like the point of like that's actually what the power that we want to provide with for a platform team. You want to give them the flexibility to do that or not to do that.
Yeah, but I don't think
some places want to enforce standards, some places don't.
No, I agree. Yeah, and we should definitely support both, but I don't think that we effectively support either right now. Granted, like I have some catching up to do on like the environment scoping stuff that you were talking about just being introduced. But yeah, like setting all this stuff up properly is difficult on both sides, both the platform operator and the project maintainer, and in some cases impossible to have the flexibility that both the platform operator and the project maintainer want in terms of like their interface with each other. Because like I said, I think the common use case is that a platform operator knows that they want every operation that is performed by this project to happen via impersonation of this particular service account with this particular level of access, right? But then I think most of the time the platform operator does not care like how the maintainer of that project then delegates access below that, because they don't know how that project is maintained. They're not familiar with the team, you know. They don't know what being a developer means in that context versus being a maintainer. But you're right, again, like sometimes they do, and sometimes the platform team and the development team are much more closely aligned, or the organization broadly respects the same set of conventions across projects. But
Yeah, but in that case, like we already support that use case, like what you said, targeting a specific service account is the same as targeting the identity or the group that is the maintainers in this project. You don't even have to create the service account because that identity is automatically used by your connection.
yeah, you're right. Like it's possible to do that in a CI tunnel access case specifically, right?
And it will be possible to do that. Well, it's actually in the CI tunnel case, you can target environments. We don't have user maintainer stuff, but in the user access, it will be possible to target. So when you're in the browser and also when you like later on when we allow you to use your own kubectl, locally, you will be granted permissions based on those roles, like based on your GitLab group, like so based on whether or not you're a maintainer in a specific project.
Yeah, and I think that's the direction that we need to head. I just think that the configuration of it would be a lot simpler if it were just this project is always uses this service account from the operator's perspective, right? And then it doesn't matter whether it's UI, CI, or GitOps, like everything's flowing through that same impersonation configuration. I don't see any reason why they would need to be configured separately.
They have different flexibility, different features. Like for CI tunnel, you can have CI job impersonation, and for anything else that doesn't make sense. Then if we have a top level, just grant access to this project, then we still have to have lower level, access modes, let's say, the way things work today with separate high level blocks for different features, because there are people who will want to tweak how things work.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I mean, I'm not opposed to having that high level new way to grant permissions. Personally, if Victor thinks people want this, but we will have to have what we have today anyway, because there are people who want the granularity. And another way to look at it all is we want to be able to get people to pay for different kind of features. So we have to be able to split features into free and paid ones. And some of that functionality is paid functionality, and some of that is free. So you can just have one single, let this project access instead of more granular functionality. Probably it depends on how the free premium ultimate structure looks. Just another way to look at it,
Yeah, I mean this also makes sense to me. I'm not opposed to restructuring like this aspect, but I think right now, like I think at this point we're like at a stage where we really need to get it in front of users so that they can tell us what they like and what they don't like. Because like we're now talking about optimizing a feature that like barely like that we are implementing, but it barely exists yet.
Mm-hmm.
Like even with the CI tunnel, I think the usage of impersonation is probably pretty low because we haven't heavily advertised it. But it is a very cool feature, like the job impersonation, especially now that we have the environment tier targeting in RBAC. And like the only thing that's really missing is dynamic namespace creation, because like Kubernetes RBAC doesn't have that. But we can already support relatively flexible review apps if you're willing to put them all in a single namespace.
Mm-hmm. I think
So like it would be real. Sorry, go.
In terms of like having both the higher level access, does anybody see a way to allow project maintainers to like grant sub access, right? Either for various features or to like rescope something per environment, or for like developers versus maintainers in their own project? Do we see a way to achieve that while still having all the configuration in the agent config project?
I mean, they can open a merge request to the config project. That's approach one. They can maybe even merge it themselves if they have access. And approach two, they can have their own agent if they often need to change configuration. Like if they all the time change configuration for some reason, maybe that's really what they should have.
And is that I suppose that would be possible today, right? Well, I guess assuming that we had the higher level access control where you could just broadly grant a project access, then I could deploy my own agents under that somehow, which then like grant access on a per environment basis or something like that.
No, you can have agent YAML in a repository deployed using another agent.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, like you could use CI impersonation to grant like high level access already to other projects, and those projects, if they want, can install their own agents and then do their own thing from then on.
The
I-
onboarding is a bit weird though, right? Because like you've granted CI tunnel access, which means then if you want to install agents, you have to like somehow figure out how to bootstrap that via CI specifically.
You can use gitops. Your agent YAML, as I said, can be in a repository, and it can be synced into a class using gitops. If you don't want to use CI tunnel, which I think gitops is a better approach in this case.
But I'd have to have somebody else deploy the agent to the cluster for me.
Well,
Only
If
the
you-
initial agent.
you either have access to the cluster to deploy the agent, then deploy it, or you don't. If you don't, then yes, it has to be something or someone else.
I guess this is just where like my sort of gripe with how we grant access to the features on a per feature basis makes things challenging, right? Because like as an operator, I've now granted this project somehow, I've granted this project access to the cluster, right, via CI tunnel, and now like for that project to then deploy its own agents, they have to use some convoluted process of specifically using the CI tunnel, even though they might want to manage that configuration via gitops, or they might want to just like kubectl apply the agent manifests to the namespace that they've been granted access to, right? So it's like there's a variety of ways that I might want to start to set that up at the project level, but like I've been arbitrarily constrained by what the infra team set up for me. You know, like there's just
I
no
mean,
way
they
for me to
will-
like hit the ground running with that.
For the infra team, there will always be ways to, make life of people hard for no reason. They can always do weird things that they shouldn't. I mean, they should let people do things in a nice way. Or just have YAML in the repository, or edit the configuration via merge requests.
Yeah.
I mean, infra team exists to ease life of other engineers usually. So, I mean, why would they make you jump through hoops? They can if they're evil, but I mean,
No, I like, to me, it seems like the way the feature is set up forces people to jump through these hoops, not because the infra team wants it to be that way necessarily, right? Like, I'm just saying, like, if the infra team wants to grant this project access to the cluster, like, they only have a couple of ways to do that. They either like pull it in as a manifest project, or they grant that project CI tunnel access. But as a maintainer of that project in question, neither of those things are necessarily how I want to get started. You know, like if I've been granted access to a cluster from the infra team, maybe the first thing I want to do is like look at what's in there with kubectl, right? Like scope out like the environment and see what it looks like. But and I know that would depend on us like having the ability to access the cluster using personal access tokens. But I'm saying like think about what that would look like if that feature did exist, right? Like, is it gonna use the CI tunnel impersonation logic? Is it going to use some other like, here's how you access the cluster via personal access token logic, right? And it just doesn't seem to align with how anybody would want to set this up on either side.
Yeah, I think this is a valid point, and like, so I've already written down what I wanted to say, which is, I think we should recommend a standard configuration. One of the things that you're like, it seems like you, like a maybe a misunderstanding is that CI tunnel and GitOps is not mutually exclusive. You can grant both to a project. Same with user access. So like I think a standard setup for your use case, the one you described, would be you grant all three, and that's what we would want to do. We would want to document to give your users flexibility. This is the recommended configuration. You grant CI tunnel with job impersonation. You grant GitOps on a standard path that includes the agent name so that the project can choose to target it, but doesn't have to. And then user access with GitLab user impersonation. Like that would be that. This is how you can achieve it today, but it is convoluted. I like that's how it is today. But and we would need to think about how to make that better for sure.
Okay, yeah, I appreciate that summary too. I would further argue that there are zero cases in which an operator cares about bifurcating access on a per feature basis. I just don't, I don't think, I could be wrong, but I just don't think that anybody who's granting access to the cluster cares about the mechanism by which the cluster is being accessed. I don't think they care about GitOps versus using a personal access token versus CI job impersonation. And in fact, I think as we go to implement these features, it's gonna make everything harder if we have to think about that differing level of access across features, right? Because like it's going to be really important that once we have the UI, that like what I see in the UI and what I've deployed via either GitOps or CI or by using kubectl on my local machine, that they always line up, right? Like, do we imagine a situation where we want those things to be different? Like is that going to lead to confusion, or does it represent useful functionality?
I think the only, like, I agree with you, like, because this is all in the end just different ways to access the Kubernetes API. Right now, the issue is just that GitOps synchronization is like you have to select the path. And if you don't select it, like if you have just a top level glob, it tries to deploy everything in your project. So if we had a sensible top level path, like maybe, you know, by agent name, like that seems like a very sensible, like something under .gitlab / like GitOps / agent name seems like a very, like it's a little bit long, but that would be a sensible default to have just turned on.
I think another option is potentially that like that there is no such thing as manifest projects, and once a project has been granted access to the cluster, the first thing they need to do is deploy some resource that represents such configuration, which I think is sort of like the Flux approach, right? You've got some resource in the cluster that represents the GitOps configuration, and so you allow a more self-service way of doing things because the agent config project has only granted access, but hasn't, like, you're not also defining the configuration for what gets synced in, right? And so you just have make that a separate step at the project level where the maintainers themselves define what paths are synchronized from the repository and whatnot, right? But yeah, it's very difficult to think about how that fits in under the current manifest project model. I definitely appreciate
I think this is a direction we would probably end up going if we kept building on our GitHub solution, because it just works better from a permission perspective. If we require the manifest project to specify the agent they want to use and the files, like for example, so we require them to specify the agent, and then also configure where that agent should find its files.
Mhm.
Then we've done that side of the approval. So then the agent has shared their API, and the manifest project has consented to sharing their files.
Yeah, I see. Yeah, that makes sense to me too.
So that is a direction we would probably go.
I wasn't even thinking about the
Um,
access, so that's a good point too, right? Like just because this config project has said, I want to treat this manifest project as a manifest project, doesn't necessarily mean that the manifest project maintainer is consenting to all of their resources being applied to the cluster. So yeah, that's a good thing to consider as well.
But one thing, just because you said it, there is one specific case where I do think we would want to, like a platform operator is going to want to shut down, and that is personal access tokens, actually, because they are too crazy.
Yeah.
Not because Kubernetes specifically is sensitive, but it's just that GitLab personal access tokens are very dangerous.
Can you just repeat that statement so I can jot it down?
So it's just when you were saying like you said you didn't think there was any case where like a platform operator would want to separate like API access, like you just want to give members of a project access to use your cluster. I do think API tokens are so personal access tokens are might be the exception there. But
yeah,
that's just a hunch.
Yeah, and it could be interesting to explore a solution that doesn't involve personal access tokens and instead involves like some sort of like OAuth device grant or something like that, right? Where like we can use a temporary JWT for authentication with CAS instead of inheriting all the problems with personal access tokens. Because I think,
but ultimately,
like
this is just semantics.
Tokens, but I think it's really just that I can access from my local machine whatever the underlying auth token mechanism ends up being. Yeah, agreed.
Even if they did restrict personal access tokens, a clever user right now would be able to, take whatever token the browser has access to. Whether that is the cookie, or if we try to lock that down, like they would always have access to the browser's token, so they could always use that API. So it's more of a make it it's more about restricting, like limiting the blast radius of if your token is compromised type of a situation.
Yeah. Is there anything anybody else wanted to discuss before we wrap up? It's getting late for most folks except Kyle. Okay. I really appreciate the discussion overall. I think the stuff that we uncovered towards the end about I think we're fairly aligned on like what needs to happen. I'm not sure where to go with like Flux versus our own GitOps solution. Like I said towards the beginning of the call, like the primary motivation for the Flux proposal was really to get us like thinking about like all the different cases that I didn't feel like we were addressing, right? And talking about it in terms of like people using some other GitOps solution, I think makes it easier to think about that stuff. What are you guys thinking are like the next steps here? Because like I think I don't know. Part of me feels like most of us like already knew where we were at and like what where we were going and like what the jobs to be done are, I guess. But like what's different now than how things have been in the past? Does anybody feel like things are different now? Do we feel like we're making progress on these things?
Do you mean after this meeting or in general?
In general. Or maybe both.
I think so user access has been, and that's like my fault for being slow on getting those Rails MRs, well, that Rails MR through, but like that's like a big like unblocker. Like once that's through, we should see
Oh, for the UI.
like yeah, for the
Mhm.
UI. But then the rest, like with GitOps, I think we weren't investing in it, and we were just about to start. Like we had tremendous momentum for like one milestone before we stopped it. Like we built out Helm synchronization, and we were gonna build out impersonation, and like that MR was ready, but we stopped it short of merging or something. I don't know that, like, so like right now things are, I guess, different because there's this uncertainty with, are we gonna build our own GitOps? Are we gonna try to integrate Flux?
Do we think that it would be worth like do we think that it would be worth at least putting a pause on our own GitOps stuff to flesh out like the other things that we've talked about here, like being able to access the agent via personal access token, being able to or some similar like auth mechanism that allows me to do it for my local machine in the UI, and building out like some sort of like more general purpose access mechanism that enables platform teams to delegate decision making to project maintainers. I don't see how any of that stuff is related to GitOps or our implementation of GitOps, but it all seems like the most important things to be done because most notably because if I'm already using some other GitOps solution, it allows me to like also start using the agent now.
Now I'm really confused now because what you just said, that's my opinion. I think we should do other things, not GitOps, and that's what we were doing actually for like a year or whatever. Since I stopped investing a lot of time into GitOps, we were investing into side tunnel and access features and all those proposals and what Hodo is working on, the UI access, and then generating configs and so on and so forth. Everything except for GitOps. But now suddenly, for me, out of the blue, everything is on fire because GitOps is slow to get features.
Mm-hmm.
Like what's happening right now, contradicting to that, right? We are building other features, but suddenly GitOps is important. So, and you are saying let's not work on GitOps now. So what is important now? I don't know. I'm confused now because
I think the thing is that like people are still asking for GitOps, even though this is not where we can provide like the maturity of value. So probably the idea was to introduce or leverage Flux, even if it's just documentation, that we can basically outsource that entire GitOps stuff to Flux and focus on, what you rightly have been focusing on, Mikhail, right? That would make sense, right? From like a general.
So we have
I think
spent.
If we could like document, like, I think it would help highlight how well we're making progress on other features if like GitOps, like to your point, is considered more of a solved problem. Like if we can show how people can can effectively leverage the agent for very complex topologies that they might already be managing, I think it helps make the case for like continued investment in the category. And certainly lets us get better ROI than like incrementally making progress on our own GitOps solution.
I mean, GitOps is a solved problem because Flux and Argo solved it, but it's not a solved problem with our solution. So if we don't want to build our own solution, I mean, we also don't need to write any docs because Flux docs are amazing already, and Argo as well. So we just need to pick what we want to do. Like I don't mind throwing away our own solution, but we need to decide what we do because we have already not done any product work for a milestone basically, and worked on that evaluation instead.
Yeah, there clearly seems to be some misalignment on what is wanted out of a GitLab GitOps integration and what like at the product level.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's something you need to synchronize again then, I guess, with Victor, or something that you should, Marshall, talk to Victor about again, because like the entire previous milestone we've been discussing how to make Flux tightly integrated with GitLab to achieve like sophisticated GitOps solution built into GitLab, as opposed to GitOps that like as opposed to GitLab being aware of GitOps products from other companies.
Mm-hmm.
And even I think Hodor, even more that we basically, with the functionalities outlined in these estimation calculations, I mean, we kind of thought about how to build environment integration into something like a Flux integration, which probably makes the situation much worse, right? Because we don't want to build these features on top of Flux, right? We want them to be separate from any GitOps solutions, right?
Yeah. And I do think that you are correct in your assessment that like this is what Victor has wanted so far, was a native GitOps solution that had this set of functionality. It's even having been around for all the history there, it's difficult to know whether that was the right call initially. Like I've always thought that Argo was somewhat immature. Flux was very immature at the time that we started all of this. You had the whole like GitOps engine thing that was happening, and so like it wasn't clear like if there was going to be consolidation around that from Argo and Flux and ourselves. So I don't know that anybody could have made the right call up front, but I do wonder at this point whether like continued investment in our own GitOps solution is going to pan out to be worth it. Like I think we just can't keep up. You know what I mean?
I think I personally don't mind either way, actually. If we decide to, you know, remove the feature, that's easy. If we decide to keep the feature, then I think there is a lot of things we can implement that are easy to implement and not like not complex in terms of how things work. You know, they're just straightforward, like fetching chart from a URL or fetching chart from a registry or supporting customize. Those things are really easy to implement, and they give a lot of value to users. And then there are some really weird features that are difficult to implement, like cross-cluster synchronization, and I don't know, something else maybe as well. Maybe we shouldn't do those. We don't have to be on par with Flux. We don't have to implement what they support, all of the features.
Like, do you think us continuing to develop our own GitOps solution takes away from like the focus on broader, higher impact functionality in the Kubernetes management category? Like,
I think there's
synergy there, or are we either working on GitOps or we're addressing higher level Kubernetes management stuff? Do we have the bandwidth to effectively execute on both?
I think effectively executing GitOps can take a significant amount of product bandwidth because we need full stack. So firstly, we need to figure it out at the product level what it should be like. We need to design it. I don't think that that on the CAS or on the agent side, there's actually that. Like, I think that's the easiest part of the whole thing. Like, that's just, straightforward engineering, copying what other people have done. That part's easy, but all the other parts are hard. Like figuring out what it's supposed to look like in the GitLab UI, and all of that.
Yeah.
But there's a high level, like, I think one of the big high impact issues that I think we probably need Mikhail's focus on is supporting like the other direction of connectivity, where so connecting to so instead of the agent initializing the connection to GitLab, having an agent with ingress that GitLab connects to support the public, to support in-house, like on-prem GitLab with public cloud clusters. Like that's a high impact use case that like we're aware of, and would require or could require a lot of things that only Mikhail knows in depth.
Okay. I definitely have to go at this point. I really appreciate the sync call, and I'll continue to. I'm gonna schedule something with Victor to chat about this stuff later this week, and I'll continue to be in touch with everybody async.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys for everybody meeting at an inconvenient time. I appreciate it. Have a good evening, morning, etc.
See ya.
Thanks. See ya.